Hello, and welcome to the Connection Podcast with Connect Global. This is a segment we're calling Global Neighborhood, a conversation with our friends and partners in order to share a global perspective of what's going on in our communities, our nation, and around the world.
Dr. Dorrell Briscoe is a writer, speaker, pastor, and public theologian. He focuses on the intersectionality of race, religion, law, and power. He is married to Tracy and a father to Luke, Noah, Amelia Hope, and Ella Grace. He is a 2007 graduate of the University of North Florida, where he earned his bachelor's degree in political science and history. He is a 2009 graduate of the George Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. There, he earned a master's degree in public administration with a concentration on urban planning. Dorrell worked in local and state government for 5 years across Florida, Texas, and Louisiana. Dorrell also taught at the university level as an adjunct professor teaching public administration, management, and leadership to undergraduate students. While teaching, Dorrell pursued and was awarded a master's degree in Theological Studies at Liberty University in 2015. Dorrell finished his Doctor of Ministry degree at Duke University in 2017. He has a strong passion for the local church, politics, racial justice, equality, and international affairs. He is the founder and lead pastor of the 6-8 Church in Durham, North Carolina. 6-8's vision is to build a gospel community that is intentionally diverse, cross-cultural, and neighborhood-centered by engaging and developing ministries in Downtown Durham and the Hayti Community.
So hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Connect Global's podcast. Today, we are joined by my friend, Dr. Dorrell Briscoe, and it is a real privilege for us to have him on this call and to learn from him, and hopefully we will kind of move the needle in the conversation of America during the times of racialized crisis. So welcome, Dr. Dorrell.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Hey, guys.
Appreciate you, man. We are grateful that you were able to jump on. I know that you're very busy. You have a lot of things that are going on. You're a pastor. You just authored this book, I think last year, came out in May. So we definitely want to jump into your book quite a bit. But we are just grateful and honored that you would spend some time kind of chatting about this, because for us, for Connect Global, our main purpose is wanting to be strategic, be sort of not reactionary, but sort of trying to see the future and see where we can bring people. I'm sorry?
I was saying right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we just want to bring people into a place of awareness of what's going on, of the things that are going on around us. We say it at Connect Global all the time that compassion without action is just observation. That's something that we kind of live by, where we see things, we are moved by things. Some things are emotional, some things are tragic, and unless we make a move, unless we make a concerted action towards that trauma or towards that tragedy, we really aren't actually doing anything. We're actually doing the worse. And so we want to give you an ample opportunity to just jump right in and help us understand this conversation around some of the things that have been going on. I think your book provides a great template. We've started it. Danielle crushed it immediately. I have started it. It's amazing already. Understanding the analytical side of this, but also bringing in the heart side of it. So I just want to give you some time. I'll defer to you and help us understand where we're at.
Yeah, and just to give a little background for anyone listening in or watching, Dr. Dorrell and I met a long time ago at a church in Jacksonville. So that's our connection and how we know each other. And he's since gone on to have this amazing life and has a heart for his community and his people there in North Carolina. And also is a Duke graduate and did his thesis on, the racialized crisis in America. And so we just know we have a lot we can learn. And so that's why we've invited you to be on, and we've invited our listeners into this conversation.
I'm so happy to be here. I really, really am. I am so grateful for this opportunity. Obviously, I watch you guys from afar. I'm so inspired by your life and your ministry, and what you're doing in the community, it's remarkable. And so thank you for all the work that you all have done. And I'm really glad to be connected with you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Briscoe, just want to echo with Javier and Danielle, thank you for sharing your time, and really insightful, and I really enjoyed starting to dig into this book. There's a Storm Coming. Really fantastic.
Right on. Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write this book? What events happened in your life? What things were you seeing in our American culture? And what really gave you that push to write this book?
Yeah. Two things that were very catalytic for me, that provides the context behind the book. The first was me as a 19-year-old kid in my dorm room watching the news coverage of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans that occurred in 2005. I was an international studies major. I was on my way to working for the State Department or the CIA or something abroad, and being really, somewhere, and all of a sudden when that event occurred, when I saw the amount of destruction and death in an American city, a great American city, I just was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe that we had such a failure of leadership on all levels of government that occurred. And so I promptly changed my major, and I moved, after graduation, moved to Texas to get my master's in public policy. And then I moved to Louisiana to do recovery work, economic development work, just to be in the state, because I just felt so moved by that crisis. So the first one was just seeing, what's the lesson that we learned in Katrina, right? I mean, we all know we were not prepared, right? The levees were not prepared. We did not have an action plan. We did not have there's no reason why that amount of people should have died. 1,833 people, billions of dollars worth of damage. So the idea of a lack of preparation and the concept of mitigation, which is the action of the action of reducing the severity of something, that was kind of like planted in my heart, my mind for years. And I did a climate change adaptation and natural disaster resiliency policy across coastal communities in the Gulf Coast. So number one, that. Number two, fast forward 9 years. Fast forward like 9-10 years. 2014, 2015. I did 6 years in public policy. I worked in government, and then I got involved in ministry. I moved back home to Jacksonville, Florida, got involved in ministry. In 2014, 2015, you had Mike Brown.
Yeah.
You had Eric Garner in New York. You had Emmanuel AME. Yeah. You had 2016, you had Philando Castile in Minneapolis, and Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, which is, so these events, these racial, and I call them in the book racial crises, were occurring in our social political climate, several times a year, and it was producing this great amount of stress and disruption and protest and unrest and riots. And I'm like, what is going on? And I was in this weird place because it was all over the news and everyone was talking about it. But on Sunday morning or at staff meeting on Monday, nothing was said.
Right.
The church the place where I worshiped, where I called home, could not speak to the pain that I had and I was dealing with as a Black man living in America. Right. And so I'm just like, man, why is everyone so silent about this? I don't understand. And so that's those two things I think were the main catalyst in writing the book.
Yeah. And you talk about in your book, the American evangelical church kind of having a missing element of the practice of lament and practicing, walking through grief and sorrow, even just as an individual or with a community of people. Yeah. And that was something in your book that really stood out to me, because it was just like you were talking about being a truth teller. It was something that I recognized as truth as soon as I read it. as in the American church, we're not very good, or even just as Americans in general, we're not very good at dealing with pain or sitting in someone's suffering. Oftentimes we are so so uncomfortable with it that we just want to kind of shut it down and say, well, it's going to be okay. It's all going to be fine. Let's just focus on the positive. And so when you specifically address that in your book, and I think you had referenced a professor there as well, and he had said that was one of the main missing elements in the American evangelical church that just really resonated with me as something that, should be involved in these conversations, because I think you had also referenced the fact that we can't just jump right to reconciliation if we're not willing to sit in that pain and realize the suffering of people that are on the margins. And so if you could just speak to that a little bit.
I was so moved by the book. Please, before you read my book, it was just not that good, to be honest with you. But
yes, it is. It's very good.
My book is very inordinately practical. It's very much like a manual.
That's why it's so helpful.
No, I appreciate that. No,
we need that. White people need that. We need someone to say, here's how to do it.
Yes. It was very much an action plan, not a lot of fluff, very direct. I plan on writing a follow-up book to it, a sequel to it, called Resting from the Storm, or Resting in the Storm. And that's going to be really a love letter to Black people.
Awesome.
And just to say, hey, okay, because the first book, and I'm going to get to your point in a second. The first book was all about it was a letter to my dear white brothers and sisters, who I love and who I know love Jesus, love His Word, love His people, but for some reason there's this deafening silence when it comes to racism, systemic racism, and so it was a letter as an action plan for them. The second one will be a letter to encourage Black people to how we can navigate emotionally, psychologically during these storms, because it's really hard for us. But basically, to your point, that when it comes to lament, I got that from I was very moved by Dr. Soong Chan Ra. Before you read anything from me, please read everything from him, because he is phenomenal. Korean American theologian, urban church planner out of Boston, teaches that. He's a professor at North Park Seminary in Chicago. He wrote a book called Prophetic Lament. I was so moved by that book. And it really, you'll see that theme in my book as well. But essentially, he's saying that, Danielle, you were like, we don't, as Americans, do well lamenting and sitting in grief with each other. We don't do that very well individually, and we definitely don't do it well communally, systemically, and corporately.
Right.
So, and that's because we have such a powerful, and Dr. Ra talks about this in his book, we have such a powerful narrative and mythos of American exceptionalism and triumphalism.
Yes.
That is literally our national story. It is the story of we out of nothing, we birthed this incredible nation. We are now a superpower. So that political narrative, that ideology, I think even pervades our theology, where we engage in this, we celebrate, we proclaim God's victory, and I think that's important, that's incredible. I love celebrating. I'm so grateful of the victory that God has given me, but I also know how important lament is to the heart of God. He wrote a whole book on it. Called Lamentations, about a community together dealing with the grief and loss of what's happened to them corporately, not just to one individual. So you're right. I mean, it's the first step with realizing, with realization, we have to learn to, instead of seeking to provide answers or to provide some quick response, what does it look like for us to not police people's tears, but give them a shoulder to cry on?
Exactly.
What does it look like to overflow with compassion and empathy so much where we say, because we never quite understand we never quite understand the shoes other folks are walking in. I will never understand the grief and pain that other able people have to navigate through in our society.
Yeah.
And when they bring up their frustration, it can be easy for me to be defensive as a physically abled bodied person, but I've got to learn to hear and listen. So that's at the heart of lament. It's here, it's hearing, it's listening, and it's allowing someone to have the space to grieve.
Dr. Briscoe, let's take that practical step, because again, your book, as you've described, is very, very practical, and we really have appreciated that perspective. While we're talking about this idea of lamenting and the separation of understanding of experience, right? So I don't share the same experiences that you shared as a child. You don't share the same experiences that I shared as a child. So although we come to a relationship with different experiences, what are some of the real practical ways, maybe even in that moment, in that conversation, or through the course of time of a relationship, that we can participate in that lamenting together? I mean, how does that look for you in just a real practical level?
Yeah, I think from an individualistic standpoint, one-on-one with a person, I think that's I think that's having a time, an intentional time, where you're really just listening to someone's story and to the pain that they're walking through. So if you're gonna have coffee, a cup of coffee with someone, it's coming in with a posture of humility and with a sincere desire to just want to learn and to listen, and not offer. And I think from an individualistic standpoint, it's like I'm gonna listen, and I'm gonna be there, and I'm gonna pray with you, and I'm here. I think from a corporate communal standpoint, I think, what does it look like in your organization, in your church, to recognize the pain that a group of people are walking through, and to create space in that service to contemplate, meditate, cry, even to create that space to think about that pain. So I lead a multi-ethnic church in Durham, probably majority Black people of color, very few Asian, but Asian people. But a couple of weeks ago, the Asian community, Asian American community, was crying out, in pain with different things going on. And so, in our service, I made it a point to acknowledge the fear, the anxiety, the angst that our brothers and sisters were walking through, and had a moment where we could meditate on that and really ask God to break our hearts for what's breaking theirs. And so these guys is being intentional and creating space for it,
Yeah. You had quoted Brenda Salter McNeil in your book. She had said the realization phase of the journey involves more than the cognitive understanding. It is a state of awareness that requires a response, because it literally changes everything we thought we understood about an experience. And to me, when I read that quote, I just thought, man, this has to resonate with people, because oftentimes we go into a conversation, or we go into a meeting, or we have this agenda already that's kind of worked up in our mind of, I already know that, I already heard that story before, or I know, what that must be like, but here's, how we can move on past that. And it's, with this quote that she said, just having to really understand that we don't know that experience is so foundational to the healing process, I would have to imagine.
It is. It is. And it's tough for some people to get there, because we have a lot of preconceived notions and ideas, especially in regards to race and racism and history in America.
Right.
And so it can be challenging, but again, it's so necessary for the healing and reconciliation process to take place, when we have that space and place to lament and grieve with other people. It's very critical.
Just in the vein of transparency, Javi and I, we've been married almost 15 years now. And I didn't know that we were in a biracial marriage until someone told me that, because I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, sure.
But one day we visited a church and the pastor came and spoke to us after and said he was so happy we were there because we were his first biracial couple. And I was really confused by the statement because I'd never really viewed our marriage that way. I just viewed our marriage as, he's the person I love and he loves me. And I really never thought of it. So that was one particular instance where even the idea was implanted into my mind. And then since then, Javier has helped me a lot over the years to understand a different perspective. And so I remember very early on in our marriage, him talking to me about the fact that racism existed and I not even believing that it did. I'm like, I don't even see that. I don't even know. I don't feel that in my heart. That's done. That was in the old days. And he's like, no, babe, it's happening today. And so he's brought me a long way in the journey to even have the eyes to see it. And that was coming from a person who didn't have a bad heart towards it, but was so ignorant to it completely, And so I realized that a lot of people that are in my circle don't have a husband like I do to kind of walk them along that journey. But it's so important, I think, that just as people, we do bring people into the conversation. Because, I was a pastor's child. I was raised in a godly home. All the things. My best friend in Florida was, a Black person. But I would tell him, in these conversations, I'm like, I never viewed her as my Black friend. She was just my friend. And he's like, that's okay. But she knew that people recognized her as that wherever she went.
That's true.
You may not have, but she does. You can ask her today,
Yeah.
And so, it's important to have these conversations.
It really is, and I think and have these conversations and like I said, to have them in a way that doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything, but it does mean that there should be a posture of humility where you're looking at a place where I'm like, okay, what do I, Holy Spirit, what do I need to learn here?
Right.
What am I missing here? And how can I learn? And so, I think it's just so important.
Yeah. And I think that's where, to Danielle's point, my experiences are somewhat limited, but they're mine and they're personal,
right.
And they were deeply hurtful at the times. And so I have something to speak towards, but then also recognizing that everyone has their own experiences, hers being even more limited and exposure to that being almost zero, but her willingness and her ability to get there and to not just hear new information and dismiss it as foreign and not respond to that. But Danielle's growth over the years in this area specifically has been exponential because of her absolute willingness to say, okay, just because I do not see that, I didn't see it, I didn't experience it, does not mean it didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think that in America right now, we're in a large place where, you hear these characters on the nightly news that have their own show that say whatever they want to say. They're making things up on the fly.
Of course, yeah.
So many people are tuning in at night, hearing this as truth.
Yeah.
And we have to be, using our platforms, whatever they are, social media or through, if we lead churches or organizations, we have to put the pressure back on people to change their mind. Yeah. We have to give.
Well, I love Javier. That's so powerful because I'm like, it's so easy to get lost in an echo chamber.
Yes.
Where you surround yourself, you live in this information bubble where you surround yourself with folks that that essentially solidify and reinforce what you already believe.
Right.
And that can be problematic when you don't have when you don't diversify your sources and in any relationships,
Yeah.
And so
You lay out a principle in the book tied back to your work in public administration, which I thought was just such a beautiful connection and of mitigation. So you talked about your work in Houston and New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, of helping municipalities and cities and things like that build in mitigation infrastructures so that when the storm hits, then there's not the loss of life, there's not the destruction and things like that. And then you correlate that to the United States as a whole, and to speak specifically into the faith community of taking action, before the storm hits, so that there are those dynamics in place that when this as you described, and I like the terminology, the racialized crisis, when this racialized storm hits, then those mitigation elements are in place already. Absolutely. And you say early on in the book, this statement, you said realization is the key to unlocking action. Mm-hmm. And to kind of piggyback on what Danielle had shared of her own personal experience, I grew up in a community in Georgia that was the birthplace of Alice Walker, the lady who wrote The Color Purple. And so the story that she wrote stems from the geography of the city that she was from, a very, very small town. It quite literally had the tracks through town, where white people lived on one side of the tracks, black people lived on the other side of the tracks. That was not proverbial, that was the literal tracks. And I grew up in that environment, being very aware of the racial differences and racial tensions. But again, thinking those were things of the past. Yeah. And so I'm saying this also to people who may be listening to this podcast or watching this episode, who might say, well, okay, there's a context of racism in the past in the United States, but we abolished slavery, we went through the civil rights movement, and so now everything's fine.
Yeah.
And this statement that you made, I think, is so critical. Realization is the key to unlocking action. And you go on to lay out some very specific 8 factors. You described the 8 factors right at the beginning of the book that have had dramatic impact, as you described, on the social fabric of America.
Yeah, right on. Yes.
And so I guess I would say, speak to us a little bit for people who may be lacking in the realization.
Yeah.
Because I think we can move from there's a storm coming to, if we're watching the news, there's a storm pressing upon us, like we're in the storm.
Yeah.
And I don't want to leave people in a place that's like, well, I didn't realize. So help us gain a little bit of that realization. What are the things that, as a pastor in a multicultural church in the South, what are the things that, to just be candid, that your white counterparts aren't realizing that we need to be aware of in reaching into the community in a cross-racial relationship building type of format?
Yeah. Well, that's great, Travis. Yeah, I think the first is that they, what I've seen, in regards to my fellow white Christian brothers and sisters, even pastors, I have seen in the evangelical church, and even mainline Protestantism, a denial of systemic injustice.
Yeah.
So folks know that folks can be racist. I mean, they know that they got Uncle Buck or cousin Billy that said the N-word, and so folks know that racism, like people can like not like black people, prejudice. They know that. It goes deeper though than that, right? I mean, and it's that's not racism. We have to be on the same page of what racism is. The semantics there. Racism is prejudice plus power. Right. I mean, what was it? Stokely Carmichael said that if a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If he has the power to lynch me, well, that's my problem, right? So it's one thing that, like, have prejudicial beliefs or biases.
Right.
We all have biases and everything.
Yeah.
It's another thing to have a power to implement those biases on a systemic level. And so a lot of times I've seen a denial of systemic, racism that is embedded in structures and systems. I also see, unfortunately, a fixation on intentions over outcomes. So we'll say, hey, look, we've had a Black president, or hey, look, there's a Black person in my church, or my dentist is Black.
Right.
We fixate on intentions, but fail to see real outcomes that continue to leave a group of people in a not so good place. So you said, what are some things that realization? What do we got to? I think the biggest thing is we have to understand that America's historical record on race is centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries deep.
Yeah.
And these centuries weren't just these weren't just practices of, white folks being mean to Black people. These were policies. These were procedures written in legal code.
Right.
Yeah.
That caused Black people of color, to live in economically depressed areas, to not gain proper educational housing, educational access, housing access. We think that legalization, so you just said it, Travis, civil rights movement, we abolished slavery. We think that legalization somehow remedied centuries and centuries of inequitable access.
No.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. Legalization, just because I now have the power to get a burger at a restaurant, it doesn't, or let's say my dad or my grandpa, it doesn't negate policies that were put in place that left Black people at a disadvantage. So for example, I've gotten to a conversation with Tracy's family about race and everything. And I'm not going to divulge where they stand, but we had I was talking to them about race, and one of our family members said, I don't see the big problem, or I don't see the big issue. And I was like, okay, let's look at this example. Your father fought in World War II, correct? Yes, correct. Okay. So when he got back from World War II, he had access to the federal GI Bill, which guaranteed education access. He had access to FHA home loan mortgage, low interest loans. Whereas my grandpa, who boldly and bravely fought in the Korean War, when he came back to this country, he did not have access to the GI Bill. He did not have access to the FHA home loan mortgage act. And so these government policies infused in the middle class and built the middle class as we know, and allowed the middle class to gain what? Equity.
Yes.
And guess what? To pass that equity down to generations. That did not happen with, but in fact, FDR had to exclude Black people from New Deal programs to gain Southern legislature support for the program.
Right.
So I would say, you have to understand that our historical record on race is centuries deep, and legalization does not mean that we somehow received equitable access to things. We are still at a systematic disadvantage, right? Number two, I think you got to look at present day.
Can I add a caveat to that statement?
Sure.
You said the racial inequities are centuries deep, and I would add, because I think there's a lack of realization in the white community as a whole, that not only is it centuries deep in the past, but it's current today. That there's a current systemic continuation of these of the very things that you're describing. And I think that's where some of that realization has to come into play. Some of that realization came into my life growing up in a community where I thought, I hate this history. Like I hate this racist history.
Yeah.
But it was later in my adult life that I realized that's not just history. That's still current today.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
yeah, that's exactly. Better job opportunities, better educational opportunities, better housing access.
right.
The legacy of systemic racism is continuing to produce structural inequality from every aspect in our lives, environmentally, educationally, public health. Look at the statistics. So this is the thing. The statistics don't lie. The math doesn't lie. So what you have to do is you have to lay blame these disparities.
Yeah.
You have to lay the blame of that at the feet of marginalized people.
Right.
That's how and so what happens is we say, people deny and say that's because they're we've heard this before. They're lazy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
They're in a victim mentality.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They all have the
just
same
work
choices.
hard.
Yeah.
They all have the same choices. They all have the, and so I've had people be like, "Well, Dorrell, look at you. You made it, Dorrell. Look at you did it." And so right. And so we have to understand that racist history has continued to leave a legacy in every aspect of a great example. And I would say, Travis, just to sum it up, 13th documentary on Netflix.
Yeah.
By Ava DuVernay, which chronicles the history of mass incarceration in America and how that has been very racialized over the not centuries, decades, right? We're talking war on drugs with Reagan, 1994 crime bill with Clinton. I mean, right? These are 20, 30 years old that are still having devastating effects. Yeah.
Right. Hey, you mentioned the war on drugs. I was reading some statistics just recently, and we've read these statistics for years and years and years. But again, just knowing some of my own sort of upbringing and lack of realization and thought processes to say this out loud. Drug use in the United States is not different by race as far as statistical usage.
Yes.
But the incarceration rate for drug-related offenses is significantly higher in the Black community, in the Latino community, than it is in the white community. So same levels of usage, same levels of crime violation.
Yes.
But extreme differences in level of criminal incarceration based upon race.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And that's not 100 years ago. That's 2021.
Still going on.
It's right, and it's decimated Black communities. We wonder where another thing that we lay blame at is where are the Black fathers? Where are the Black men? Where are the Black? They're all. Well, when you have over policing in neighborhoods, when you have a police cracking down inordinately in Black and brown communities and locking them up, and then these men and women receiving these horribly harsh sentences and being locked up for decades. I mean, no wonder you're dealing with some of the problems in these communities. So you're absolutely right in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's the issue right now that we see, because of course we have an organization that is missionally minded. We try and, find ways in which we can right, these historical wrongs in certain ways, whether like in Honduras, we're working on poverty reduction, or we're working on access to education, or, we're finding tools in which we can disrupt these historical, ancestral sort of just hindrances on people who've just never had that chance, never had those opportunities, never had access to that. And the bumps that we come up to time and time again are getting people to understand that their need is not just environmental for their moment, but that it was built in.
Yeah.
That because they were born in Central America, or because we were born in, Detroit, or because we were born in, these different communities, we're seen as different. We're seen as less than. We're seen as
other,
something other. And getting people to truly understand that has been very difficult for us. It's been, even with the immigration crisis that we see, that we will describe that way, is described that way, and us understanding the backstories there, us seeing it on a deep, not philosophical level, but a deep personal level, where we've held mothers weeping for their kids because they felt they had no other choice. When we hold their hands and pray with them because they haven't heard from their son-in-law who made the trek and made the journey, and now is just, there's no check-in, there's no voice memos, there's nothing, and so we don't know where he's at. And so when we see those personal struggles and the things that people are going through, and it turns from emotion to action for us, and then we say, hey, let's go tell someone else about it, and it's met with this sort of like blank stare, or it's like, oh, well, did you know that person personally? If we see a news headline, well, did you know that one? Did you know that mother? Did you know that child that was separated at the border? And I'm like, no, but I've met hundreds of others. So if I didn't know Michael Brown, or if I didn't know, anybody on a personal level, I've met them before. I've seen it before. I've held their hand before. I've hugged them before. I've hugged a mother after losing their son before. So it doesn't have to be that particular person for me to be empathetic towards their plight, towards their journey. And how do we transfer that to someone else? How can I get someone on board with that who's resisting? Because we have so many friends that literally, even if they bring up something, we have a lot of friends that bring up these, very divisive, very polarizing issues to us personally in personal conversations. And then we share our experiences, and we share our journey and kind of where we come in, maybe from a very different angle. And then it's like heels get dug in immediately to resist the change of their built-in bias because of this new information that I'm, freely giving. I'm not charging for my opinions at this point. I'm giving it freely because they've, freely communicated with me. And then it's just like this immediate, like, I just want to stop this for my discomfort, for my pain, for you to not confirm my bias is like turning my world upside down. And then we take a minute to breathe and say, well, imagine how they feel.
Right.
If I took your breath because of a comment that I just made, and yet here's somebody that we watched his breath leave his body for 9 minutes on TV, over and over and over again, and not just him, but how, every couple of weeks we see something like that happen. If it takes your breath away for me to talk to you about it, how do I get them to understand that it's taking this huge community's breath away every time it happens?
Wow. What a great line. Taking their breath away, because it is so gut wrenching and heartbreaking. We, especially as African Americans, Black, and I can't speak for other groups of color, but I know that there's a collectivity to our trauma. That something can happen in Spokane, and we can feel it in Hoboken. Something can happen in Seattle, and I can feel it right here in Durham. I think that's it. That really got me. It hit me in 2016 with Alton Sterling and Philando. And it was this internalization. And so you're right. And this is nothing new. Javier, Trevor. This is, Martin Luther King said this in 64, 65. He said, whites, it must be frankly said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance.
Wow.
It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn.
Right.
And so and even in the early 60s, Gallup did a poll. This was 63. Pollsters from Gallup went door to door and asked whites if they thought whites and minorities were treated equally in matters of housing, education, and employment. This is 1963, okay? 66% of whites said yes. They were being treated equally. In other surveys around that time, nearly 90% of whites believed that Black children had the same opportunities as white kids when it came to education.
Wow.
Yeah.
This was at the height of segregation, the height of back of the buses, color only, whites only, can't get a burger, bombings in churches, dogs being sick and biting kids, and yet there still was that ideology.
Right.
And so, yes, we can educate. Yes, we can realize. It also I think it just takes a miracle from the Holy Spirit too.
Yeah.
I just think it's just, I think there's something to be able to educate and move people out of, because it's hard. It's like, isn't this what Jesus calls us to? This dying to yourself, right? A lot of times, my white brothers and sisters don't want to hear this stuff because it attacks their identity of self-determination.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's why they cannot stand the term white privilege.
Right.
Because to them, that says you somehow got it easy. When they're like, are you kidding me? I worked my butt off. I worked 60 hours a week. I grew up, I had nothing to eat when I was growing up. And we're not saying you didn't have it hard.
Right.
We're saying from a corporate systemic level, Black people in mass have been at a disadvantage when it comes to access and opportunities educationally, housing, environmental, and all that stuff. And so,
but how nice is it to only be affected by the terminology and not the true effects of what that means?
Of the reality.
Like, to me, that's what blows my mind, is that so many people get so erupted with anger or with, resentment at the thought of being labeled something, not even ever having really felt the effects of what that label means to most people.
Right.
And so to me, I think that's where we're struggling to find people who are willing to risk loss or risk likability or risk public, fame, maybe even. You talked about it in part of the chapter, maybe 6 or 7, prophetic leadership. You say that the church has to stand up. You say that pastoral leadership must not be based solely on charisma, energy, or intelligence.
That's right.
There must be a moral decisiveness that we have that compels us to speak and act on truth, whether it feels good or not, and not be concerned with our likability. And I would also add the fear of just not being liked at all, because that's the thing that we're up against, is that people are so concerned with their opinion marking them, and it changes how they're viewed at the country club, or it changes how they're viewed in the church service that they attend once a month, or it changes their aptitude. I mean, the attitude of people who look upon them as a leader, because they're everyone's leading in some level, and so they don't want their leadership to be touched. That
likability and money. Likability is huge. You're right, because we buy into this celebrity culture, and that is very pervasive in the church as well.
Yes.
So celebrity culture, likability, also money. I have had numerous white pastors say, you know what? I see it. I see your pain. I get it. I know it. I mean, people see this stuff. I mean, Bob Woodward asked Donald Trump not 2 years ago, does systemic racism exist? Yes, it does. And it said the words from Donald Trump, the conservative senators, they know it exists. It exists. So people know this stuff exists. The reality is, but it comes at a cost to do something about it. And that's where we lack the political will. That's where we lack so in the church, I have heard numerous pastors say, Dorrell, I see it, I get it, but you know what? If I say anything, I'm going to lose 30% of my tithers. I'm telling you, they're like, I cannot say anything because there are movers and shakers around here, and if I offend them with this, then they're gonna leave, and we can't. And they're like, so I can't do it.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
Wow.
I would say for people who, because there's still some people that pretend to us that they don't see it, that they don't get it, they don't see it. And like, I'm in the camp that you're in. Like, I don't, how could that even be like real?
Intentional ignorance.
Yeah, intentional
It's
ignorance.
intentional ignorance.
Now we have to add liar to the column.
Or liar. You could go either way.
And so for anyone listening in on this conversation, if you fall in that camp of, oh, I don't really even think it's real, and I don't really see it, and I don't treat someone as an other, and I don't think that as a American system we're treating people as an other, I can say practice what I've been practicing. Be a truth teller around your dinner table with your family and your friends, and you'll start feeling like another real fast. They'll start letting you know, oh, you're not one of us anymore.
Yeah,
that is true.
That's how you can tell. That's the litmus test.
Yeah. So if anyone out here that's listening thinks that they want to put that to the test, just even if you don't believe what you're saying, try and speak for a person on the other side of things in your mind, of someone on the other side, and you'll start being told real fast that you're an other in that circle.
Yeah.
Very fast.
Well, and I think that feeds into this statement you said earlier, Dr. Briscoe. You use this terminology of a deafening silence.
Yeah.
That when there are these racialized crises that happen, then from the white community, and specifically, if I remember correctly, you contextualize it in white faith leaders. There's a deafening silence. I think sometimes there's a sense as a white faith leader of, I don't know what to say. I don't want to be patronizing. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to be insulting. I don't want to be patronizing. I do not want to jump on a bandwagon that says, we had an event, so for the next 24 hours on social media, I need to be relevant to the culture. I want my words to be integrous. So I think there's a heart change. And then like what Danielle and Javier were just saying, there is an intentional ignorance. There's sometimes I'm just going to lie about it. I'm just going to do nothing about it.
Deny
this exists. I don't have relationships, so I don't have a context in which I can relate. And so but I have to be honest that maybe I've intentionally done that in my life, that I haven't put myself in relationships with people of color to even know what's going on. So help us a little bit, speak to that a little bit. How do we, what do we say? What can be said? What's the right thing to say that gets rid of this deafening silence that would say, Dr. Briscoe, you're black, I'm white, but I'm willing to step into this pain and to actual change with you.
Love that. Thank you, Travis. That's great. Yes. How do we respond? I mean, how do we, because you're right, that's the big thing, because there are a lot of good-hearted white faith leaders that want to say the right thing, that want to say something, that want to stand up, that want to that see that stuff's not right.
Yeah.
But but because of for whatever reason, maybe they said the wrong thing at one time, maybe they're afraid of saying the wrong thing at this time. They kind of fall silent. I think a couple things that we can do. We can defend and amplify black pain.
Yeah.
We can defend and amplify black pain. And so what does that mean? Like, we can point out that our black sisters and brothers have been crying out about this for centuries, for decades.
Right.
Yeah.
And all too often the church historically has turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to their cries.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we say at my church or at this organization, we are listening, we are learning, and we see.
Yeah.
We see. It's not this whole we're colorblind, we don't see color.
Right.
We don't see it. No. We see God's rich tapestry of colors and his beauty of creation. Right. And we recognize that several of these colors have the image of God has been intentionally attacked and diminished by groups of people. And so we as an organization, we are going to defend that. We're going to amplify that. And that can be, I think I try in my book to make it general enough for you to be where you are in your church. Yes, it was very practical, but I also hope it was general enough, because the reality is leadership is like a pressure cooker. Too much, if you turn the temperature too hot, you're going to blow the pot. But if you don't turn the temperature enough, you ain't gonna cook the food.
You're not gonna get it.
You gotta have wisdom in your organization with where your people are at, but also where you're trying to get them to go. So there has so that's why I'm not saying like, man, you got to say Black Lives Matter on social media. You got to post a black square. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, you should be judicious, and you should be cognizant of the pain that Black folks are dealing with, people of color are dealing with. Number two, I think we need to call out the very real reality in history, ongoing reality in history of white supremacy and systemic racism. That stats you could, and that's via social media, you can post. I had a friend of mine who is a pastor of a mega evangelical church in Jacksonville. This was several years ago, but he started posting stats of Black people being incarcerated. And he said immediately people thought someone texted him and said in his congregation, "Hey, pastor, I think your account was hacked."
Oh, wow.
They were like, what? I think he's been hacked.
Oh my gosh.
You are, but he's like, no, I'm going to.
That's great.
Look at the statistics here.
Wow.
So this is what we're in, and so we're I think those are two surefire ways we can respond when we say, listen, we are committed to listening, to learning, to doing the work, and to allyship. We're committed. And I can't, and that's for me, because you got some folks out there that are like the super woke weekend warriors who loved and revel and enjoy calling out white people who get it wrong. For me, I'm like, man, shoot, like if you're in a war and we're in the trenches, as long as you're shooting that way, and not at me, I'm okay. Like, and I don't mean to make that I don't mean to use that violent term, but essentially like, hey, are we on the same team here? And so I think you communicating that, I think it's very clear. That's a very powerful way to respond.
And I know we kind of have to wrap up here, because I know you're busy and you've already given us over an hour of your time, which we're very grateful for. But there was one other thing that you had mentioned several times throughout your book, the author Austin Channing Brown. And I had read her book, I'm Still Here. I had actually read hers before I read yours, I think because I saw something you posted or somewhere it was a recommendation. And so I had read that. And I think it was in her book that she talked about the importance of bringing people of color to the table, and in the way of getting their perspective and their expertise and their knowledge and their education. Because I think something that I have, one, I have participated in, and then two, I have now just seen, because I can now recognize it, is that a lot of times in the white community, we interact with people of color only in the lane of charity. So we are comfortable in that environment as long as there's still an elevation in position. And I can say in my childhood, and those, serving in the soup kitchen or different things, I never cognitively thought of it in that way. I didn't think I was doing something in like a sinister way, or even putting myself up on a pedestal. But when your family is only taking you to environments with people of color, and you are on a pedestal because you're the one that's providing the food, and they're the one receiving the food, that kind of puts in a little trajectory in your mindset of who I am and who they are. And so I think that a lot of times the white community, and Christians in particular, think, oh no, I'm all good because my friend, my daughter has a friend that's Black, and he's from this or that neighborhood, but we still allow him to be friends, so so we're all good here.
We're good.
And I loved that she was so specific to say you got to move past that. If your only interaction with people of color is in a way of charity or there's some sort of hierarchy, and it's not that we're trying to be peers and not even sometimes peers, but like I need to learn from you. Like you have a lot you can teach me. I just thought that was powerful, and it was like a light bulb moment for me.
Definitely.
Me too. Me too. That is a part. That's what it looks like to decenter traditionally dominant voices and recenter voices on the margins. Recenter. So even for us as a multi-ethnic community of faith, Black-led pastor, we're a United Methodist church, and so the denomination is predominantly white, but we're a very young multi-ethnic church. But I am very intentional about centering the voices of women, particularly Black women, in our congregation. Awesome. Because I'm like, man, patriarchy is real. Toxic masculinity is real in the church. So what does it look like for me to intentionally decenter myself and recenter? So what I'm doing. So again, fixations on intentions over outcomes, right? It's like, no, I can't just say like, like my best friend is a Black woman, Keandra, Kiki, because she's a part of our church. I had to look like, what does it look like for me to preach instead of 90% of the year, 80% of the year? I'm preaching 60% of the year, and then women of color are preaching the other 40%. So I'm preaching 50. So I'm literally looking at my message count. This is just a small example, right? I'm looking at my message count, and I'm adding up the weekends, and I'm like, nope, I'm going to make sure I'm preaching 50, 55, 60% of the time, and women of color, Black women, because we need to hear those voices. And so you're right, we have to recenter these voices, and we have to be intentional. This is the thing too, and I'll say this: we a lot of times we can approach people of color from a hierarchical standpoint, and when things happen in our socio-political climate, in the fabric of our society, what I've seen in churches is they will rush to get a Black person on the stage to talk about their pain. And I used to be like, man, that's good, that's so important, man, I love that they're doing that. But as I've grown, I've realized, I'm like, I don't know how healthy that is, because if it's not, I think it's important to do, but if it's not coupled with a commitment to institutional change, I don't know how I think you're still just getting into a very interpersonal. Because what happens is like the Black person will share some harmful story of what happened to them, and people will feel really sad, and I think I think that's good to center Black pain, but I think that we have to make sure as organizations, as churches, what are we doing to reflect the institutional inclusivity that is needed, that's needed. So, like I said, for me, for us, our board is predominantly women of color. I think it's 4 women of color, 3 men, or something like that. Preaching, we have 2 teaching pastors that are women of color, Black women. So again, what does it look like to consistently hold your institution accountable? I'm sorry. To include not just diversity, not just number. See, a lot of organizations, and I'll close with this, a lot of organizations love to have Black and brown faces around. But they do not want to hear those Black and brown voices. The faces are allowed to be proximate as long as they are palatable to the status quo. But when those voices start speaking out, that's when it's a problem. So what does it look like for us as organizations, as leaders? And again, I'm right here, I'm leading, I'm trying to ask this all the time. Like, Dorrell, what are you doing to be educated, and for your organization, for your church, to hear voices of people who are on the margins? And everything. What does that look like for you? And so,
I think that's heavy. That is heavy right there, because I think many people are willing to allow someone to use, or maybe not even use, but even just to be at their platform, but it's still only maximizing their influence,
Yeah.
their own
So
influence,
true.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like what you said, you know, it's almost like a parade of, okay, let's bring this. We're not really recentering the voice towards them. I'm just amplifying my own voice as someone who's inclusive.
Right.
And so I think that's another big difference where we've got to really differentiate between, are we truly including people in our power and influence when you have it, or are we only allowing them to abide next to it? Because I think that's a big difference. There's something there that we have to separate those two, and we have to actually elevate people, not just sort of like invite them. And so I think that makes a big difference. And I know, you know, thank you so much. We have had so much. We kind of ran the gamut, and we kind of touched on a lot of different areas. Each one of these little microseconds, we could probably do a whole podcast on each of these moments. So I don't want to take anything away from that. But I am encouraged because I hear that all of us have work to do. All of us can start somewhere. We don't have to start with the heavy lifting. I mentioned earlier before, I acknowledge and respect your powerlifting, but I could not go to your gym today. I could not go to your gym today and lift what you're lifting. I can admire it. I respect it. I see where you're at, and I see the work that you're putting in. But if I'm ever to move the needle on getting to where you're at, I have to pick up the weights at some point. I have to start somewhere, right? I have to start where I'm at. And I think that's what's encouraging. So even if this content was heavy, and a lot of it that we touched on is something like we talked about, where it's going to put a lot of people in a very tense, nervous place to hear this. But we can start somewhere. I can go to the gym with you, and I'm not going to lift where you're lifting, and I don't need to even think that I can. But if I go alongside you and you teach me and you instruct me and you show me the proper form and the format in which to do that, I can start to move towards that direction. And I think that's what this podcast is going to be about. The legacy of this conversation will be that we all have some work to do, and we can all start somewhere.
And I just appreciate you guys. This has been one of my favorite podcasts to be on, because normally I'm like, hey, talk about your book. And I'm like, okay, well, 22 minutes and then go. I just love, it has been so refreshing to just interact and to flow and bounce off of each other. So thank you for this, for a conversation. I mean, obviously I am very grateful anytime I'm allowed and I'm invited to speak, because for so many years I was silenced. For so many years, I was, you know what, Dorrell, we don't need a politician. We need a pastor. Dorrell, people don't need to hear about that stuff. You're silent. Dorrell, don't say anything about that stuff or you're going to get fired. Like, so again, I am very grateful to be able to share my work, but I'm even more grateful when I can have just a wonderful, robust conversation that where you bounce and you flow and you hear so thank you so much for just a wonderful conversation.
We had a lot of fun.
We all learned a lot today. I know that.
Yeah, you took us to class, man.
I really appreciate, I have to say, I really appreciate your candor. In both the book and the conversation. Because, you know, we hold ourselves in our relationships to be open and honest with one another, and to be candid with one another, and so it's refreshing for us. You know, it's refreshing for us to kind of walk through this conversation with an open heart, because we get it. You know, as much as we can, we get it that for you to start sharing your heart, we don't know what's there. Maybe there's joy, maybe there's pain, maybe there's, you know, who knows what those life change, you know, we all have those moments where it's like this one moment right here that I can't tell anybody about, but it changed the trajectory of my life. And so I just really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us and to graciously have this very candid conversation with us. It's very meaningful.
Absolutely.
Awesome. It's never been our desire to create the context that you described a moment ago, where there was a George Floyd event, and then the white guys put a black guy on stage. That's never been our heart, our intention. But our heart and our intention has always been, how do we have conversation that actually is healthy, for everybody involved. And then if people happen to have the opportunity to listen into that conversation, then it's healthy for them also. Because the intentional ignorance and the intentional lack of realization, just because we want to have blinded eyes, or just because we're going to say, I'm going to be blind to this issue. I can say, at least for our family, which I'm very proud of, we have said we're not going to stay in that place any longer. And so I really appreciate.
Well, I really appreciate you guys, because this is what gives me hope, and this is what keeps the wood on the fire. You know, the gasoline in the tank. This is when I see white folks, well-meaning, just like, hey, we're with you. And I don't have everything, and I may not explain it, but I see it, I hear it. That's what it is just so life-giving. And it's like, it helps you breathe a big sigh of relief, because you know that there are folks out there in the trenches having those conversations and pushing the conversation forward. And so I am just so grateful to y'all for your bravery and your boldness.
Awesome. Well, we are definitely looking forward to the next release, the next book. I'm gonna buy
working on it.
Books. Maybe anonymously send them to some friends, and boldly send them to some other
book set. We're gonna send them both.
I'm gonna send them both. Because it is important. It is important to get this conversation started in as many communities as possible. And individually, we have a lot of influence. It's a lot harder to sit across the table with someone on an individual basis and have them lie to my face. So we've got to get in that uncomfortable stage of getting to people where they're at. Doesn't matter. They can, start lifting the 5 pounds, but we got to get to them. We got to make it to them and bring them along with us and bring them up in weight class as soon as possible.
Absolutely. I love all your powerlifting examples.
I had to give you credit in there somewhere, man.
Exactly.
He's stronger than he gives himself credit for.
I know.
I'll say that.
It's because I'm jealous. I want to go up there and I want to start with you, man. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know that we had a great conversation. So you are the man. We appreciate you so much. And we are praying with you. We're still with you. We're following along on your journey as well. And hopefully we can have another conversation like this again soon. Man.
Absolutely. Hopefully an in-person gathering soon.
That would be really cool. So cool.
Yes.
All right.
Well, blessings, y'all. Y'all take care.
Say hello to Tracy for us.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to learn more, connect with us at connectglobal.org.